That's right, it's once again time for the Cheap Seats annual Kraken Awards. The now third time that we've done this, so I suppose if you wanted to make it sound really fancy, the third annual Cheap Seats channel specific Kraken Awards. That's not the ones that the team handed out at the end of the season after the last home game, but the ones that we have done through this channel, through especially the voting of the patrons over on Patreon, for at least the ones that aren't related to the counting stats. Basically, we just take the NHL awards but apply them to only the Kraken. And if you are among the people that are thinking, really, we're doing awards for this team, another disappointing season where even if you weren't necessarily among people expecting them to make the playoffs after the moves they made in the offseason, there was still some expectation they would get a lot closer than they did. And I think there's no one that's going to argue with you saying this was a disappointing season with them finishing sixth in the draft order. So if this just seems like a bunch of participation trophies, again, I get it. See you in the next one. But for the rest of us that would like to have at least one more little bit of fun to fully wrap up the season before we move truly into the offseason, and we will have one more video on the channel to wrap up the season, but even there I'm going to kind of wrap up the season and then go into what the Kraken are going to do in the offseason. So this will be the last one truly dedicated to the end of this fourth season. Well, let's get into some awards and have one last little bit of fun in what, might not have been the most fun season otherwise. And we might as well start with the easier to determine awards, the ones that won't have any suspense tied to them, the ones that are just based off counting stats that, if you were keeping track of it, you would have already known who won them once the last game came to an end. And we'll start with specifically the Art Ross, the player that had the most points for the Kraken over the season, and for the fourth year running, that was Jared McCann. Every season the Kraken have taken the ice, McCann has had the most points at the end of it, this year winning it with 61 points, one short of how many he had to win it last season. Still healthily above the 50 points he had in the inaugural season, where he won that again, but still a few short of the 70 that he had in the season the Kraken made the playoffs. Either way, for McCann, he continues to score the most for the Kraken, or at least put up the most points between goals and assists. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he also had the most goals for the Kraken, which is the next award, the Kraken Rocket Richard for the most goals in the season, which, for the first time in Kraken history, was not Jared McCann, as it was won by Jaden Schwartz with 26 on the season, which is the fewest goals that it's taken for a Kraken player to lead the team, with McCann one above that in the first season with 27. Then he was all the way up at 40 and back down to 29 last year. So for Schwartz, it didn't take quite as much as the previous three seasons for McCann, but he did lead the team, staying just ahead of Tolvanen to end up winning that one. McCann actually falling all the way back to third on that one with the 22 goals, so he wasn't quite able to catch Tolvanen at the end of the season, but still north of 20 goals for the fourth straight year for him. And that then leads us into the awards that are not decided by counting stats, but we still have a couple right off the bat that, for the Kraken anyway, were relatively obvious who was going to win them. They are still awards that at the end of the season for the NHL are voted on, but I really didn't even bother putting them up for votes on Patreon since, well, for one of them, there was really only one true candidate, and for the other, it was pretty obvious who was going to be selected. Now, some of the other awards was also fairly obvious, but worth putting up for a vote. The first one, though, the Kraken Calder, going by the NHL rules of what Calder eligible is, which means that Shane Wright was not eligible this season. Really the only player that played more than one or two games that played his first chunk of games in the NHL and was eligible for the Calder would be Yanni Newman, who came up and played a fantastic handful of games at the end of the season, as we all well know. And I think it's pretty obvious that with Wright not being eligible, Newman was the best rookie of the year for the Kraken. Now, if you want to include Wright because the reasons that he was disqualified from eligibility are just that he played a small handful of games over two different seasons, then it would be pretty obvious that Wright was the rookie of the year for the Kraken. Either way, whether you want to include Wright or not, it's pretty obvious that it's either Wright if you want to include him or Newman if you don't. The other pretty obvious one would be the Kraken Vezina, the goaltender of the year. And while there are really only two truly eligible options in Decord and Grubauer, then you had a couple of appearances here and there from some guys making their NHL debut. I don't think there's going to be very many people, even the ones that really like Grubauer, that are going to argue for him as the goaltender of the year for the Kraken. So Decord, the obvious choice for the Kraken Vezina this season. But then with the final three awards, and then one more fun one that I threw on just for the heck of it, I suppose the fun of it, there was enough reason to put it up to a vote and see if there were some different opinions on how different aspects of the season went for the Kraken and different player performances. But in the end, only one of them turned out to not be unanimous, and that actually was the Kraken Norris, the defenseman of the year, where the finalists were Brandon Montour, Vince Dunn, and Adam Larsson. I did put up other for all of these just in case enough people disagreed with the finalists I put out there. Though at least this year anyway, nobody ended up picking other on any of the votes, so the finalists were truly the finalists. And for the defenseman of the year, although it was not unanimous, in the end, it is Brandon Montour ends up winning it. Vince Dunn, for the first time, not winning defenseman of the year for the Kraken, as voted on by the patrons over on Patreon. If you feel differently, feel free to put it down there. At least one person did feel like it was Vince Dunn. But Montour did have a better season offensively, and they both were pretty bad defensively. Dunn was even a little bit worse there. While they still were both giving the Kraken quite a bit on the offensive end, I personally would have gone with Montour, so I think the correct player won here. And yeah, just as far as that is concerned, the defensive end defensively really didn't go well for the Kraken at all across the board, so you kind of just lean on whoever did the best for the Kraken offensively, and that was Brandon Montour. I mean, I suppose there's something to be said for the Norris as a whole for the NHL tends to lean quite a bit more on the offensive side of the game than the defensive side. It's usually of the top scoring defensemen who also played pretty well at the other end, and that's usually how the award ends up getting handed out. But anyway, for this season, Brandon Montour comes to the team in free agency, and at least as voted on by the channel, was the best defenseman the Kraken had. Then at the other end of the ice, but sticking with the defensive mindset, we have the Kraken Selke, the best defensive forward for the Kraken on the season, and there the finalists were Matty Beniers, Jared McCann, and Ellie Tolvanen, the only three that had relatively respectable defensive stats. And in the end, this one did turn out to be unanimous, and unanimously with the correct decision in Matty Beniers, really the only Kraken player as a whole on the season that had good defensive numbers. Matty Beniers, even aside from the points production that we'd like to see a little bit more out of him, but he still was up there, one of 4 players that had 20 goals for the Kraken on the year. He was easily not just the best defensive forward the Kraken had, but for large chunks, if not the entire season, the best defensive player they had, aside from, I suppose, Joey Decord. Though I suppose even with all that being said about the good defensive play from Beniers, I still didn't even have him as a finalist for the Kraken Hart, the MVP for the Kraken this season, and I think there's a good argument that you could have had Beniers as one of the 3 finalists. In the end, I ended up going with Decord, McCann, because he continues to lead the team in points and was up there with goals as well, and then Brandon Montour for, I just felt like it was good to have the one goalie, the forward, and a defenseman, and in this case, it wouldn't really matter what skaters I put out there, as the runaway winner with this one, and rightfully so, was Joey Decord. I don't disagree. He was easily the best Kraken player on the ice. The only Kraken player that I think would have had a realistic reason to be included at an all-star game at that point in the season. I suppose Montour was playing pretty well around that time, so maybe Montour would have gotten the look if there had been an all-star game. Either way, Decord, I don't think there's going to be too many people that would argue with him being the MVP. He was selected as the MVP by Seattle area media, so the channel's not going to, or at least this time, doesn't disagree there. Yeah, a well-earned and I think pretty obvious selection for MVP of the season. I suppose really the only argument you could have for not having Decord as the MVP is that with the Kraken season going the way that it did, it was not that valuable for them as a franchise to get the number of wins that he stole for them. It would have helped them a little bit to get some more losses, but we're not going to get that into the weeds with it. As far as helping the Kraken win, which is the ultimate goal for the players on the ice every given night, Decord helped the Kraken get the most points in the standings individually of any of the players on the ice, and I really don't think there's too much room to argue with that. So I suppose then it should come as no big surprise that when I put up the last award, or really 3 awards, I suppose, to give out here via Patreon, the Kraken 3 stars of the season, Joey Decord did get the first star. Again, all the same obvious reasons. The second star ended up being Brandon Montour. I was kind of surprised that Montour was, he was picked as a fan favorite by the fans, which I kind of would have figured would have been Decord as far as the official awards that the team handed out at the end of the season. But yeah, Montour seems to have been pretty popular among the fans, and he did, I think deservedly so, win the Defenseman of the Year. So, yeah, Montour ends up getting the second star, and then the third star ends up going to Jaden Schwartz, which I suppose leading goal scorer, and being the leading goal scorer in his mid-30s, also being healthy the entire season for the first time, and doing a lot of the things that we'd like to see more Kraken players do by going to the net and taking some punishment and getting some of those greasy or hard-working goals, as they say. Yeah, I mean, there's good reason to like the way that Schwartz played this season, and it doesn't hurt that he was a big part of that line that really started to play well from kind of mid to late December on, from when they got Capo Caco with Capo and Beniers. Schwartz, Caco, and Beniers were a very good line for the Kraken, and Schwartz ended up often on the goal-scoring end of that. And then finally, to wrap things up, the final award, or again, set of 3 awards that we're going to hand out here for the 2024-25 Kraken season, the 4th season for the Kraken, would be the cumulative 3 stars over every 3-star handed out at the end of every R&R over the course of the season. And a big shout out to all the help that my wife put into getting the spreadsheet together and helping me keep track of what players that Patreon and I had handed out to different players over the season, what stars had been handed out, and in what order, with some weighting towards first star versus second and third. The far and away runner away with the first star for the Kraken, again, Joey Daccord, no big surprise. He had the most stars, the most first stars, the most third stars, with 25 total on the season. He ends up with 15 first stars, 4 seconds, and 6 third stars on the year. Yeah, by far and away, not, I think, a big surprise. Daccord, the first star cumulative over every R&R 3-star. Second star might be a little bit more surprising. It was Shane Wright. He was tied for the most, or second most first stars. He ends up with 7 first stars, 4 second stars, and another 6 for third stars. So Wright, if you weighted a little bit, actually even without weighting, he still had the second most total with 17 total. So, I mean, even if you don't weight it, he still would have been the second star of the season for the Kraken. And yeah, he started the season tough, and there's probably a little bit of bias there of just we were watching, or especially towards the end of the season, watching Wright a little bit more closely. So when he had that run, especially from kind of the return from the Four Nations break through the next month, where he was a point per game, even above that for a little over a month, and heck, he was almost a point per game from when he was scratching in mid-November up until the end of kind of midway through March. So yeah, Wright had a fantastic season, and while maybe it seems a little bit surprising that he would have been second star, I suppose it kind of fits. And then the third star, another younger player, so if you can believe these 3 stars as far as what Kraken players had impressive seasons, it does bode well for the future. The third star was Matty Beniers. Again, he was cumulative, kind of the next guy up, with 15 total, 5 first stars, 7, the most of any player, the most second stars, and then 3 third stars. So Beniers, the third star cumulative over every R&R, and another player that had a pretty good year. Certainly better on the defensive end. Like I already said, we'd like to see a little bit more points production from a first-line center, but he was the only Kraken player with positive defensive metrics, and by far the best defensive skater for the team. But with that, I think we'll start the music playing and wrap things up on this one. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you weren't over on Patreon, no hard feelings whatsoever, but I'd love to know your thoughts as to if you would have voted differently on any of those awards, maybe have not made them necessarily unanimous for the 2 that ended up being that way, or if for some reason you'd like to disagree with the obvious ones. But I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section regardless. And until next season, where hopefully we can also have for the second time a Conn Smythe for the best playoff performance, would be pretty nice. Well, until then, I mean, we'll have a lot of videos between now and then, but for this year, thank you for joining, and we'll get to some more off-season content here in the near future. One more wrap-up video coming up that will kind of really wrap up this season and any kind of further review of it as we move into also in that one looking at what the Kraken are going to do in the off-season, and that's where we'll be keeping our eye then for the next few months. We'll have a stream coming up here for the draft lottery. At least I'm pretty sure I'll have to make sure that I know when exactly the draft lottery is, but I'll probably stream for that. It'll be a short one. And then likely a stream as well for the draft, since I won't be at the draft this year. So still some stuff coming up. some 101s that I'm overdue on that I need to get out there, hockey history video that I'm quite overdue on that I need to get out there. And yeah, we'll still have content on the channel as the off-season goes, just obviously not quite as frequent as the 2 to 3 nights a week over the season with the R&Rs. So just want to say again, a big thank you to everyone who has been with us here to the bitter end of the season and a week plus past it. Wasn't always the most fun, and some of the view counts did drop towards the end, understandably so. At least the Kraken were watchable. I mean, they had some fun comebacks towards the end of games, which made it at least a little bit exciting towards the end of it, and they were actually watchable because they weren't just on cable. But we can save some of that for the full season wrap-up that I'll have out here, hopefully towards the end of this next week. And I suppose until then, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.